In April and early May, Iraq prepared 3 brigade groups for dispatch to Palestine. The expeditionary force, initially numbering some 4,500 soldiers, was commanded by Major General Mustafa Raghib, who was replaced in effect in September by the Army's Commander-in-Chief, Salah Saib al-Jaburi. Iraq decided to intervene at a cabinet meeting on the 22nd or 23rd of April. The news of the fall of Arab Haifa had apparently been decisive. The Iraqis told Britain that, in the face of the continued Zionist aggression, Deir Yassin Tiberias, and the terrible massacre at Haifa, she must take necessary measures to prevent a disaster which would threaten the very life of the Palestine Arabs and be fraught with danger to Iraq itself. She was bound to do so as an Arab state, and also because public opinion in Iraq insisted that some action should be taken. But the expeditionary force crossing through Jordan with Abdullah's agreement moved very slowly owing to logistical problems and poor roads. Iraq's 2nd Brigade Group, consisting of 2 infantry battalions, an armored car battalion, and a battalion of 25 Ponders, began arriving in Mafraq, Jordan, at the end of April. The Iraqi force was to constitute the Legion's junior partner and right wing, first in the Jordan Valley and subsequently in the hills and foothills of northern Samaria. But it had come with an agenda of its own. Apart from helping to crush the Jewish state, the Iraqis appeared interested in reaching Haifa, on the way conquering the area on either side of the length of the Iraqi Petroleum Company pipeline that conveyed oil from fields near Mosul through the lower Galilee to Haifa. On the evening of the 14th of May, the brigade occupied the Nahar Rayim Jizr Yal Majami electricity plant, an Israeli enclave just east of the Jordan. But finding the 2 bridges across the river demolished, they turned south. On the morning of the 15th of May, they forded the river, their objective Kibbutz Geshur and the neighboring police force, which overlooked the river. The kibbutz was pounded by artillery through the day. We are surrounded since last night. 3 mortars are intermittently hitting us. 2 aircraft dropped the bombs. It is not known to whom they belong, radioed Geshur. The Israelis opened the floodgates at the Degania and Dalhamia dams, raising the level of the Jordan, but without real effect. The Iraqis kept crossing. On the 16th of May, the Iraqis captured Camel Hill, northwest of Geshur, and launched simultaneous infantry attacks on the kibbutz and the fort. Israeli Piper Cubs pinpricked the Iraqis from the air, and the defenders repulsed the Iraqis, inflicting heavy losses. The following day, the Iraqis renewed the assault, this time with armored cars and infantry. The armored cars broke into the fort's courtyard, but were beaten back by a hail of Molotov cocktails. 6 cars were put out of action. The Iraqis then besieged the settlement for 5 days. Israeli counterattacks under the hot Jordan Valley sun on the 18th of May, more than a dozen troopers fainted from the heat, failed to dislodge them from the camel. The Iraqis tried one more direct assault, and then on the 22nd of May attempted indirection by scaling the heights of Kakab al-Hawa, the site of the Crusader fortress of Belvoir, dominating the area from the west. But Golani Brigade troops, who had dug in on the crest the day before, beat them off. Witnessing the Iraqi fiasco was the regent Abu al-Ila. The Haganah had made effective use of two of the 65 mm cannon that 2 days before had been used too tellingly against the Syrians a few miles to the north. The Iraqi situation, stranded on the west bank of the Jordan without bridges for resupply, and with Geshur and Golani robustly fighting back, was unproductive and in the long run precarious. The Glub needed them elsewhere, under IDF pressure in Jerusalem, and in desperate need of the Legion's 1st Battalion bivouacked around Nablus. Glub pressed the Iraqis to leave Geshur and to redeploy in Samaria. On the 22nd of May, the Iraqis threw in the towel and withdrew back across the Jordan. The brigade group, now joined by the forward elements of 2 further brigade groups, the 1st and 3rd, drove southward along the east bank and then crossed the river westward at the Damaya bridge into Samaria. During the first truce, in June and July, 2 further scratch brigades, the 4th and 5th, joined the Iraqi force in the West Bank. By September, the Iraqi Expeditionary Force, with 5 brigades, consisted of 18,000 soldiers, making it the largest Arab army in Palestine. A handful of British officers advised the Iraqi army until they were ordered home in early June 1949. Once in Samaria, the Iraqis were largely inactive, but renewed Haganah pressure on the Legion at Latrun resulted in a major Iraqi attack, at Glub's request, to disperse Haganah energies. On the 28th of May, an Iraqi battalion attacked and took part of the coastal plain settlement of Gilum, southeast of Netanya. Alexandroni troops counterattacked, while the Iraqis were busy looting and retook it. A hateful of IAF aircraft periodically bombed and strafed the Iraqis during the next 3 days. The Iraqis hunkered down in Samaria and made no further offensive efforts except to capture on the 30th to 31st of May of Ras Al Ain water pumping station midway between Galim and Lida. The IDF decided to take on the Iraqis at the northern tip of their perimeter in Jenine. It is unclear what motivated the General Staff. A desire to preempt a possible Iraqi push towards the Jezreel Valley, or to the Mediterranean through Israel's narrow waist, at places a mere 10 miles wide from the Arab lines to the sea, a desire to draw legionnaires away from Latrun, or to prevent Iraqi assistance to the Legion, or merely to grab additional land before the UN truce came into effect. In preliminary operations on the 28th to the 30th of May, Golani units advanced southward from the Jezreel Valley and captured a string of Palestinian villages, Zeren Nuriz and El Mazar, in the Gilboa's foothills and the crest of Mount Gilboa itself, as well as Tel Megiddo and the village of Lejan. To the west, the area had been held only by a ragtag collection of militiamen. Its conquest paved the way for the advance on Jenine. On the 1st to 2nd of June, Moshe Carmel launched the core of the offensive, using the Carmeli Brigade 2 battalions, the 21st and 22nd, and Golani's 13th Battalion, with additional Golani companies in reserve. The objective was to conquer Jenine and surrounding villages and to kill and destroy the enemy. Golani swiftly overran the villages of Sandala, Mokwabila, Jalama, and Orana, and on the morning of the 3rd of June, Carmeli, in 3 columns, moved on Jenine itself. But though the 21st Battalion managed to occupy 3 hills overlooking the town from the west, the 22nd and an armed bus column failed to take some of their objectives, including the key Jenine police force to the east and parts of the town itself. The troops suffered from the intense heat and from an inability to dig in on the rock-encrusted hills. Jenine's defenders, consisting of several companies of Iraqi troops and local irregulars, resisted stubbornly until a fresh battalion of Iraqis, apparently commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Omar Ali, and a battery of artillery arrived from Nablus. A confused seesaw battle ensued. Iraqi air attacks and the arrival of the reinforcements, who mounted a determined counterattack, broke the back of the 21st Battalion. The battalion had bad luck. A chance shell hit its command post and killed and injured several officers, including the battalion's deputy commander, Shraga Mostobolsky, who reportedly muttered, "How awful and difficult to be wounded in such a place before dying," and a rumor spread that a retreat had been sounded. The companies in the hilltops west of Jenine, having taken several losses, broke and fled from one hilltop position after another. Flight proved infectious. Some of the retreating troops reached 22nd Battalion positions, which also began to crumble. Throwing in his reserves, Carmel managed by nightfall to occupy the center of Jenine, now mostly abandoned, but the retreat of the 21st Battalion and the precarious situation of the 22nd to the east of town, while the Iraqis held on to the police fort and harassed the IDF movement to the north, left the troops in the town center badly exposed. Carmel informed the General Staff that his situation was critical and offered a choice: if the IDF mounted an assault on Tulkarm to relieve the pressure in Jenine, he would order his troops to stand fast. Otherwise, he would retreat. The General Staff responded that no attack could or would be launched against Tulkarm. Alexandroni wasn't up to it. He must decide. Carmel ordered a general retreat, and the units in Jenine, along with the 22nd Battalion on the night of the 3rd to 4th June, withdrew northward. By morning, the IDF had redeployed along a line just south of Orana. The Israelis had suffered 34 dead and 100 wounded. The Iraqis and irregulars, perhaps some 200 dead. The IDF had narrowly missed delivering a major blow to the invaders. Jenine had been a nasty defeat. Superior IDF forces had been routed by a small number of Iraqis and irregulars. But as often happens in war, defeat can sometimes produce strategic dividends. The abortive attack on Jenine, coupled with a minor success of Alexandroni troops at Quequan, northwest of Tulkarm, had persuaded the Iraqis, much as had happened with the Egyptians after Yad Mordecai and Istad, to sit tight and not to venture again out of the Arab-populated triangle. The nightmare scenario of an Iraqi thrust to the Mediterranean across Israel's narrow waist had been averted. The Syrians. With independence in 1946, the Syrian government had planned to enlarge its army to division size, with 3 brigade groups. But as with the Egyptian and Iraqi military plans, May 1948 caught the Syrians on the hop. On paper, the army mustered some 10,000 soldiers. In reality, owing to a lack of weapons, ammunition, and trained manpower, only 1 brigade, the first commanded by Colonel Abd al-Wahhab Hakim, was more or less ready. Hakim indeed apparently argued that it was not. The brigade had about 2,000 troops and consisted of 2 infantry battalions, an armored battalion with a company of light Renault 35 and Renault 39 tanks, mounting 37mm cannon, and 2 companies of armored cars, some mounting light cannon. The brigade had 4 6 batteries of 75mm and 105mm guns. Another brigade, the second, was still being organized and would consist of 2 infantry battalions and a battalion of armored cars. The infantry was equipped mainly with obsolescent French rifles, though some of the soldiers carried British and German makes. The Syrian Air Force consisted of about 20 Harvard trainers, converted for use as fighters or bombers, and a number of light aircraft. A large proportion of the planes were unfit for action, as were many of the pilots. The Syrians suffered from a shortage of ammunition. The Syrian invasion got off to a poor start because of the last-minute change in the Arab war plan and because of the army's low work standards. As one Israeli observer was to put it, the Syrians would generally fight in the morning. During the afternoon, they would take a light siesta, and at night they would go to sleep in ordinary fashion. Instead of pushing into northern Galilee from southern Lebanon, the 1st Brigade made tracks on the 14th of May for the Golan, from which it was to cross into Palestine, at the southern tip of the Sea of Galilee. The Syrians aimed to help save Palestine and destroy Israel, but their immediate military objectives are less clear. Apparently, they had the vague aim of reaching Al-Fula, linking up with the Iraqi army, and heading for the Mediterranean at Haifa or Netanya, thus cutting the Jewish state in 2, or at least isolating the north. But it is also possible that the Syrians intended only limited local gains, such as the conquest of Tiberias or even the whole of the Sea of Galilee shoreline, which they could then tout as a victory. Back in February, Syrian politicians apparently told the visiting Palestinian leader Musa al-Alami, in line with traditional Greater Syria, ambitions that they were interested in gaining control of all Palestine, or at least its Arab areas. But by mid-May, their ambitions appear to have been reduced substantially. On the 18th of May, the British minister in Damascus reported that the combined Syrian-Iraqi objective is Tiberias. To judge from the Syrians' actions, they may have been right, at least as regards Syria. Early on the 15th of May, elements of the ill-equipped Syrian 2nd Brigade attacked Kibbutz Ungev on the Sea of Galilee's eastern shore. At dawn, a lone fighter bomber dove on the kibbutz and released a brace of bombs. They missed. Syrian infantry opened up with machine guns. The children and many of the women were already in shelters, and the men were in the perimeter trenches. The following night, after a heated debate, the kibbutz sent its 150 children, accompanied by 70 older members, by boat to Tiberias and safety. The Haganah regional commander reacted angrily. Engev had not received permission. Engev's poorly armed defenders awaited the ground assault, but none came. In fact, Engev was a diversion. The main 1st Brigade's assault, commanded by Colonel Hakim, was mounted at the southern end of the lake into the lower Jordan Valley. Facing the Syrians was Golani's 12th Barak Battalion and local militiamen, dispersed in the kibbutzim. A company of the Palma's Yifta Brigade and militia platoons from settlements farther afield joined the fray during the following days. The Syrians began crossing the border at Al-Hama in early hours of 15th of May, shelling the kibbutzim and its west throughout the day. One infantry company attacked Kibbutz Sha'ir Hagolan, but was beaten back. A kibbutz member described what he saw that evening when she had her guard post and went to the shelter. The children were wet with sweat. Inside it was crowded. All the non-combatant inhabitants were inside. Girls, members, parents, pregnant women. It was impossible to reach and see my girl. I returned to the post. Later that night, the children and many women were evacuated. Half a mile to the north, a Syrian battalion occupied the ridge of Tel el-Quasir and pushed westward, taking the former animal quarantine station on the eastern edge of Samak, and then attacked the village itself. The situation was confused. Haganah platoons from Jordan Valley settlements hastily deployed in the empty village. 2 20mm cannon, a Piat, a handful of bombing missions by Haganah Air Service Piper Cubs, and a company from the Golani Brigade were to prove crucial, and the Syrians were beaten back. Outside Tiberias, the Jews built barricades and fortifications. They believed the town was next. The situation was very grave. The situation was very grave. There aren't any rifles. There are no heavy weapons, Ben-Gurion told the cabinet. The Syrian brigade, spearheaded by cannon-mounted armored cars, attacked Samak again on the 16th of May. Again, the attack was beaten back, though the Syrians gained a toehold by occupying the former British Army camp on the village's eastern edge. Syrian President al-Kuwatli, flanked by Prime Minister Jamil Mardam and Defense Minister Taha al-Hashimi, visited the front that day. Al-Kuwatli instructed his troops to destroy the Zionists. At dawn,